Three OSHA investigators walked into our main gate on a Monday morning at 8:30 sharp. I know exactly what they found when they got there. I was sitting in my truck about half a mile away, drinking coffee from my thermos, watching a cargo ship work its way up the Houston Ship Channel. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't checking my phone every 5 minutes. I already knew how this was going to play out. My name is Wade Morrison. I'm 48 years old. For 16 years, I was the Port Safety Director at Bayport Maritime Logistics, overseeing hazmat operations for one of the busiest container facilities on the Gulf Coast. My job was simple: keep people alive, make sure a $3 $2 million OSHA compliance contract stayed clean, current, and audit-ready at all times. I was the guy who knew every safety protocol by heart. I was the guy who could tell you exactly which crane needed its 30-day inspection and when. I was the guy who made sure the hazmat documentation was filed correctly and the emergency response teams knew their procedures. I was good at it. 16 years, 0 workplace fatalities. That's not luck. That's systems. I cleaned out my desk on a Thursday afternoon. The OSHA inspection was scheduled for Monday morning. Nobody thought to ask me about the transition before they showed me the door. Let me back up a bit. Bayport had been family-owned since 1991. The Sullivan family ran it like they understood that moving containers full of chemicals and heavy machinery could kill people if you weren't paying attention. I came on board when I was 32, fresh out of the Marines and a construction safety job in Galveston that paid decent but had no future. I'd done 10 years in the Corps, mostly logistics and equipment maintenance. You learn things in the Marines that stick with you: how to maintain systems properly, how to follow procedures that matter, how one person cutting corners can get people killed. Those lessons don't leave you when you put on civilian clothes. Bayport needed someone to build their safety program from scratch. They'd had a serious incident in 2009. Crane operator got crushed when a safety cable snapped during a container lift. Guy named Tommy Rodriguez, 34 years old, 2 kids. He lived but barely, 3 months in the hospital, never worked again. That incident woke everybody up, including me. I'd been there about a year when it happened. I was still learning the operation, still figuring out where the real risks were. But I was the one who had to write the incident report. I was the one who had to explain to OSHA investigators exactly how a properly maintained crane cable could fail during routine operations. Turns out it wasn't properly maintained. The previous safety coordinator had been signing off on inspections without actually conducting them, just pencil whipping the paperwork. Tommy Rodriguez never blamed anyone directly. But every time I saw him around town after that, at the grocery store, picking up his kids from school, he'd nod at me like he knew I was trying to make sure it never happened to anyone else. That nod meant something to me. Still does. I built the whole operation over the next 3 years. The documentation systems, the inspection schedules, the incident reporting procedures, the emergency response protocols. I wrote the employee safety handbook. I made sure every crane cable got physically inspected every 30 days, not just signed off on. I made sure every hazmat container got logged and tracked from the moment it hit our dock until it left on a truck. I sat through 6 major OSHA audits and passed every single one without a violation. Clean record every time. Not because I was lucky, because I knew that every shortcut, every missed inspection, every unsigned form could be the difference between someone going home to their family or ending up like Tommy Rodriguez. The Sullivan family appreciated that approach. Old man Sullivan had started the company after 20 years in the Merchant Marine. He understood that the ocean doesn't care about your profit margins, and neither do 40-ton container cranes. His son, Mark, took over in 2018 and kept the same philosophy. Safety first, profit second. It worked for everyone. Then the Sullivans sold the company 13 months ago to a private investment group out of Austin. That group installed Troy Patterson as CEO. Troy was 39 years old and had spent his career in tech startups. He'd sold a logistics software company for Serious money and figured running an actual logistics operation would be basically the same thing, just with more computers. He'd never set foot on a working dock. He'd never seen a 40-ton container crane in operation. He'd never watched a forklift operator navigate a narrow aisle between stacks of chemical containers. He didn't know what a hazmat manifest looked like, and he definitely didn't know what happened when you filled one out wrong. I know this because in our first meeting, he asked me to walk him through the digital safety dashboard. I told him we didn't have one. He looked confused, like I'd told him we were still using typewriters. I explained that OSHA inspectors don't look at dashboards. They want to see physical documentation, signed inspection sheets, paper trails they can follow with their hands. They want to verify that the person who signed off on a crane inspection actually climbed up and looked at the cables, not just clicked a box on a tablet. Troy nodded like he understood, but I could see he didn't. He was already thinking about how to fix what he saw as a problem. In his world, everything that wasn't digital was automatically inefficient. For the next few months, Troy kept circling back to the same themes. Why couldn't we put the safety logs in the cloud? Why did inspectors need to physically walk the facility when we could use drones? Couldn't we automate most of the documentation process? Every time, I gave him the same. Dear man, sir, OSHA doesn't work that way. They show up with clipboards and they want to see real documentation, real signatures, real records. They can flip through and verify on the spot. You don't get to modernize federal safety requirements just because you find them inconvenient. Troy would nod and say he understood, then 2 weeks later, he'd bring up again with some new angle about optimizing workflows or streamlining compliance processes. He kept using words like ecosystem and synergy in contexts that didn't make sense. I started to realize that Troy had never worked anywhere that couldn't be solved with better software. The problem is, you can't debug a snapped crane cable. You can't install a software patch on a chemical spill. When something goes wrong on a dock, people can die in the time it takes to boot up a laptop. That's why OSHA requires physical systems, physical documentation, and people who know how to use both without electricity. I tried explaining this to Troy multiple times. I used analogies, examples, real incident reports from other facilities. But every conversation ended the same way. Troy would acknowledge the regulatory requirements, then suggest we could probably find a more efficient way to meet them once we really understood the underlying workflow. That's when I started to realize that Troy fundamentally didn't understand what business we were in. He thought we were in the logistics business. We weren't. We were in the business of moving dangerous materials from one place to another without killing anyone. The logistics part was just implementation. Then Keith Holloway showed up. Troy's consultant, 27 years old, background in digital transformation for manufacturing companies. Keith had gotten a safety management certification from an online program. Took him about 8 weeks. He was proud of that certificate, showed it to me twice in our first meeting. Troy introduced Keith as someone who was going to help bring our safety operations into the 21st century. I showed Keith the master safety binder, 5 inches thick,